Well, good morning. It is great to see you all here, have you here for our series here where we're talking about generations. It's been fun and we want to have fun with it. But I think it'd be important to know that like the driver behind this for us as a church, for a series like this, is like we want to have fun with it. But it's also because being a multi-generational church is like a really important value to us. It's something that we have held on to as a church and believe in even as a calling, going back even before I was the senior pastor around here. It's in our DNA. But one of the things that we have learned over the years of being a multi-generational church is it's not easy to be a multi-generational church. There's lots of struggles and tensions with it, and it hasn't gotten any easier in the last couple of years either with this. But you know, it's not easy to be multi-generational anything in our world today, right? There's a lot of tension out there. There's a lot of struggle with that. And Ryan and I were able to sit down with three groups of people here recently, all from a different generation, and just talk about this a little bit. And we talked about their experience with these differences.
So what do you all notice most about the differences between boomers and millennials? What's the biggest difference you see between the two?
I see it like this. Boomers are very structured and millennials are like anti-structure. They don't want rules. They don't want to be on time. It's a generalization, but it's a very obvious one. Baby boomers, they're going to be on time.
So what do you think older generations think of when they think of millennials?
I think we're most known or stereotyped as being entitled, feeling like we deserve things that we haven't earned.
I think we get a lot of that we're inexperienced and that we don't really know what we're doing. I feel like that's what I have experienced, at least from different generations on us.
Where do you hear that?
Well, when it's told to your face from someone of a different generation, you're like, all right, cool.
like at work or neighborhood or like.
Yeah, like I've literally had someone tell me, like, you don't know what you're doing. You're too young to be in the job you're in. You're just entitled, and this is a hobby for you. And I'm just like,
I think older generations often think that we give up easily, or that we don't try to push through the difficult things, that we just, it's getting hard and I'm just gonna not push through that.
How do you think they would describe you guys? What do you think they'd say?
I think, and I'm gonna put it on our kids because they do this sometimes, is they think we're really stuffy.
Traditional.
Anyway, yeah, like the
conservative.
Yeah, and I think they think that's what we are.
Have you ever heard of the phrase "okay, boomer"?
No.
You have not?
No.
Oh, really? Okay.
No.
So like there's like t-shirts and posters and all kinds of things with this phrase, and it just says "okay, boomer." And millennials tend to be the people who purchase this particular shirt. And it is usually in reference to just the idea of like, they think they know everything.
Have your thoughts, which you think are perfect or spot on.
Yeah.
Okay, boomer.
Like the stereotype
Dismiss.
exists to the degree that there's like
Dismiss.
commercial marketing.
But I wonder if at the point where we are in our age, the millennials, when they get to be our age, might not think the same thing of themselves. I don't know.
The tension is there, and it's real. And even as I was prepping for this series and this morning, like you could see it out there. But when I think about the church, right, there's something more for the church. There's a higher kind of calling for the church because we live in a world where that tension between generations has been there a long time, and it's not going to just go away. And if there's any place that should be a picture of how there can be unity between generations in a beautiful way, like it should be with the church. And there's a passage I want to look at this morning where Paul speaks to the value and this kind of calling to the church to have unity. And if you have your Bibles, turn with me to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. Because I want us to look at this. And he's speaking to this more than just like unity between generations. He's talking about unity across the board, including the kinds of struggles that we might have between generations. He says this, and it's at the beginning of chapter 4. Look at verse 1. He says this, "As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received." And he says this because he's writing this from prison, and it's like he can't go and just go and work on these things at the church in Ephesus. But he's saying, join me with this. I urge you, like, be with me in seeing this beautiful calling that the church has. And he goes on through this whole thing, and there's a bunch in Ephesians about this idea of this calling of unity that we are to have. But the question becomes, how? Like, how do you go about achieving and finding that kind of deep and beautiful unity? I want to read this to you because I wrote this, like, if the world were to write a verse on, okay, how do we achieve this unity? And just looking at how our world handles things, I think this is what the world would say about this. Here's what I wrote. Be completely firm and strong in how you know you're right. Be quick. Focus on the issues. Make every effort to keep the wagons circled around your view of the world through the bond of holy arrogance until everyone agrees, right? Just stick to your guns and stick to your guns, and then you'll find unity through agreement when you can get everyone to your side. Like if you need to shout louder, right? That's like in so many ways, like that's how the world would turn to this. But I want you to see, again, what Paul says about this. Look at verse 2, and here's how he says to go after how to live out this calling in a more practical way. Verse 2, he says this, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. That is so countercultural to the kind of messaging we hear in our world today. Right? Like this would be so out of the box. But they're amazing words. Let me read it to you just one more time, and then I want to break these words down here. He says this, right? Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. So, right, he says this because this is how we live out this higher calling, that whatever it is that might divide us or keep us from uniting in a more beautiful way in Christ and in love, he's saying, this is the way forward. And so I want to just take a moment and just walk through this passage just a little bit here and then apply it even more directly as we think about this thing of different generations within one church here. So he starts off, right, and he says, be completely humble and gentle. Right? Like this is the opposite of arrogance, right? It's the opposite of saying, well, I'm just right. I'm right about this thing, right? How many times have we felt that or have said that in a moment? What he's imploring us to do here, right? To be completely humble is to be open. It's to be a learner. It's to say, okay, I'm going to pause and I'm going to try and understand. Even if I end up not agreeing with it in the end, I'm still going to seek to be open that maybe I would change my mind on this, that I'm going to learn something, that I don't know everything in this. And arrogance is harsh. There's a harshness to it. And this is important, that in seeking this kind of humility of being open and learning, even in those moments where you're open, you examine something and you come back and you say, even though I've heard the other side and I've explored this, it's only made me more convinced than ever about whatever it is you're convicted about. You don't have to hold that belief or that conviction with harshness, do you? We can always hold those beliefs with gentleness. And that's what he's saying, that you don't have to have that harshness with those beliefs. He says this, he says, be patient. That's a rough one, right? Be patient. But what he's saying is, give people time. Be slow to force issues. Be slow to make demands. Be slow to take stands on things. Because isn't this true? Faith in Jesus is not a faith of panic, worry, or controlling others, right? If you find yourself in a place like on some issue between you and someone else, and you're finding yourself in a place of panic or worry or trying to control them or push something, you're not living in the faith of Jesus in that moment, because faith in Jesus isn't a faith of panic or worry in those things. And he goes on and he says, bearing with one another in love. I love this part. Bearing with one another, right? To bear with, it means in whatever the situation is, like you're finding a way to bear with, to hold, or to bear up that person or the story that you have in this. To bear up means that you're going to hold something about this person in a different way. Instead of rushing to a story or a motive about that person that is assuming the worst of that person, to bear up with them, it says, okay, I'm not going to jump to, they are saying that or doing that because it's a character issue. It's a flaw in them, right? That's not bearing up with them. Bearing up with them is saying, okay, what's the story? What's the lens? What's the view that I can take that helps me hold them up? That even if we disagree, there's a kind of understanding that helps me be with them. I'm going to keep bearing with them. And so to bear up means to be quicker to assume the best in them. And this takes great intentionality, and it takes work to gain some understanding of someone who maybe doesn't see things the way that you do. He goes on, he says, make every effort. And notice the language in this. Make every effort. Be completely, right? Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit, not the unity of agreement. That's a totally different kind of unity. We're not going to find that in the church or very many places in life, right? And that's really a pseudo kind of unity anyhow. But instead, a kind of unity through trusting God, even when we don't agree, right? That I will find unity in the Spirit by trusting God in me, even when I don't understand why that person believes that or is coming at it in that way, or despite my frustration in this. And he goes on, through the bond of peace, we can have a kind of bond with one another. And at the very least, it's understanding that we share this. We all share this. We all want peace. Take any issue, and on either side, it's people who want peace, right? And so often we lose peace, but it's because we let go of peace in moments because there's something that we fear. We let go of peace because we feel like there's something we must defend. We let go of peace out of shame. There's just all of these things. But if we can always remind ourselves that even below those, there is a desire for peace, that whatever I'm dealing with other people within my church, we all want peace. in this, that he's imploring us to move forward in all of this. He's saying that there's a kind of way that you can move forward that pulls us into unity. And not just that this is a good thing, right? He's saying this is our calling. And it starts with a lot of realization. You cannot be completely humble. You can't bear with one another in love. You can't be patient without taking the deliberate steps of creating understanding. And part of where that understanding goes is this, and there's something I want you to see in this, but it's this. The first step is in realizing each generation is doing the best they can with the cards that they were dealt in life.
And it's a quote about a particular generation. And I want you to take a wild guess at what generation this writer is talking about. The younger generation, now reaching maturity, seems utterly incapable of taking on their responsibility to the nation. They are more aimless, soft, and generally immature. What generation do you think that was written about?
I feel like that captures what we think people think of millennials.
That was our parents saying those.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was just gonna say. It's
I
about
think so too.
boomers.
Or the generation before them singing about them.
Every generation. I think a boomer said it about Gen X.
Ooh, really? Okay. Huh.
It just seems like something that you could say about almost every generation if you're the older generation.
Yeah, I think it would be our parents saying it about our generation.
It was written back in the late 30s, and the author, his name is Lester Tenney. He is was a World War II survivor from the Bataan Death March, and it was written about his generation right before they were getting ready to go into war. And the thing to think about is that generation that it was being said about, we refer to them now as the greatest generation because of what they endured. And you read his book and realize what he went through. It's like, oh my gosh, the metal they were made of was unbelievable. But that's what was said of them at one point.
How many of you, if you were guessed correctly that it was the greatest generation that quote was for? Anyone? Yeah, it's okay. A couple of you. Yeah. Here's the amazing thing about that. I came across that quote just reading this book, not even for this series. It was just a book I was reading myself personally, and I was just like, how in the world could anyone think that of that generation? But it just goes to show that, like, right? Every generation gets these labels. There's things that are said about every single generation, and we all feel them. We feel them about what's being said about our generation, and oftentimes we think them about other generations. But if we are to actually come together in unity, we need to begin growing our sense of understanding in order to bear with one another, right? And part of that understanding starts with what I said right before this video, and that is it's understanding that every generation is like they're doing the best with the circumstances, with the hand that they were dealt, that they could. The other thing is this realization, and it's this. Every generation is dealt a unique hand of cards during their formative years, right? And by that, what I mean is during those formative years of, like, think about like adolescence through like their very young adulthood. Every generation faces like these life-altering events, and because it's during their formative years, it does something. So like the second realization I'd say is this: every generation has a different view on life with unique cares and concerns because they uniquely went through those formative those life-altering events at that formative age or years in there. And so every generation, we all have these different views, because of our circumstance and the lens that we have. And if we don't understand that, we will incorrectly evaluate, judge, or read the actions and motives of every other generation out there. Right? It's a way of happening. And so I look at what Paul says and why he says, okay, man, it takes a lot of patience. It takes bearing up. It takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of listening because it takes a lot of understanding. So here's what I want to do. I want to take the second half of my message here and just walk through the application of this, and literally walk through 4 generations, the 4 main generations in our world today and in our church, and just look at some of the labels given each of those generations, but maybe gain a little insight that will help the rest of the generations have a new insight and appreciation for that generation. So that's what I want to do. So we're going to walk through each of these generations here. So we're going to start with the boomer generation and go all the way through to Generation Z, the Z generation. So starting with the boomers here this morning. The reason they're called the boomers is because at the beginning of their generation, the birth rate just like booms. It just like takes off. And all of a sudden in our country, we have one of the largest generations, for sure up to that point, that we had ever had in our country by a long shot in this. But one of the labels, and you heard it in the video earlier, one of the labels that gets put on boomers oftentimes is they're know-it-alls in there. Or said another way, oftentimes, maybe even more so, is boomers think they know better. Right? And whatever the issue is, work, neighborhood, life, whatever it is. Now, if you're a boomer, you might be going, well, I've been through a lot and I kind of do know better, right? That's right. And if you're a millennial, you're going, yeah, you do. Yeah, right? I hear that way too much, right? So I want us to have a little understanding about what is maybe read at different moments with this label in particular on here. When you think about the baby boomers going back to when they're first being born and they hit these formative years and they're coming into our world post-World War II in a era of our country and most Western countries where there was more raw opportunity for people than had ever been seen for generations and generations and generations. The boomers came into a world where there was going to be all of these unique and new things for them to thrive in. And you'd say, wow, what a blessing. But it is a blessing and a curse, because part of what they heard, and if you're a boomer here this morning, I'm going to roll through some of these, and you may go, oh my gosh, yes, I did hear that. Boomers heard from their parents and their aunts and uncles and grandparents, things like this. You're going to get to have more education than anyone has ever had in our family ever. Boomers, they had an opportunity to get higher education, even like through high school, way more than anyone else in their family. And they heard about it. Like, you're going to get to do this. They heard from their family and friends and the older generation. You're going to have more opportunity with a career and career advancement than anyone has ever had in our family. The world was opening up to the West and especially the United States in amazing ways. And so boomers, they came into the workforce. The chance for them to pick different careers, they had more options for what they wanted to do in their career than anyone else had in their family. Like, it just seemed like this amazing thing. The economics of that time, there was so much potential as the US and Western countries became just this massive global marketplace that just fueled the economy. But you know what else came with that? Was this curse, because with that came this kind of message. And the message was this. The message was, you're getting all of this opportunity and you better live up to it. With great opportunity comes great expectation. And I'll go so far to say impossible pressure to actually accomplish what was like emotionally laid at their feet, right? Imagine growing up and no matter what you achieved, like it wasn't enough because it's just like, but you have to do more because you have been given so much more. Like you've been given an opportunity and accidentally, right? They had this burden put on them. To top it off, they're trying to live this out in the shadow of the generation before them. And I want you to think about the shadow that was cast over them, right? This is a generation that saved the world from Hitler, invented atomic energy, and, cured polio. So, go outdo that, right? It's like, how could you live up to all of this? And with it came this additional message. And if it gets hard, you just need to buck up and do what you're told. And we don't want to hear about your feelings on all of this either, right? Because, and I see some boomers nodding in this. Yeah. Think about this. Right, they're in the shadow of a generation that suffered unbelievably at a deep psychological level, right? They went through the Great Depression and then through World War II and then the Korean War. They were hurt and damaged by that. And you know how they dealt with it? You just don't even talk about it. You just bottle it up inside. And that was kind of the message that like boomers had. Like it gets, you just better go achieve and just buck up, right? So what you have is this beautiful blessing that comes with this tough curse. Boomers end up being maybe one of the most driven generations our country has ever had. I mean, they are driven to accomplish because that's all they heard from the very beginning through those formative years in there. So don't be confused when you read things about how boomers are struggling with retirement, right? Like that's a thing nowadays, right? They're putting off retirement. Why? Because there's still more they need to accomplish. There's this other thing that's happening. As boomers go into retirement, nowadays, it's becoming like a psychological crisis. They're boomers who refuse to get any therapy or counseling their whole lives go into retirement and suddenly going, I can't handle this. I got to get some counseling, right? Every past generation was like, no, retirement is the therapy for what you went through life. And boom, but understand, because there's this burden that they've held, it's just like you've got to accomplish, you've got to do more. And now go into retirement and just give up my whole identity and something. Like there's a struggle in all of this. And so maybe the thing to remember in moments where you're just like, I'm frustrated, like there's a boomer that just like they're saying, well, I know a better way, this is what it needs to be, or like they've got all this drive, or it's just, remember, bear with them that maybe they have a lens of the world and a burden they've been carrying, and like this, it's just what they know. Like they're struggling through all of this as well, but they just know drive in this. And maybe we can bear with that, just understanding that more. And let me say this to all the boomers in the room, and I say this in the most pastoral and affectionate way. I mean this, just like a way of encouragement, okay? Share, okay? Share in the opportunities. Share in moments that even if you see something and you're just like, but I know a better way. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it doesn't mean it has to be the only way. Like, pull other generations into feeling more like they're with you in changing the world, because we love the gift that you have given us in this world. You have changed the world. I talk about like boomers, they opened the door to so many changes, right? They have a passion to make the world better. And that is a passion that all generations in the church share. That's a beautiful thing that's come out in this. We all want to make the world better. You know what, boomers, you know what we love you for? You opened the door on that. You didn't just, you slammed the door open on that. You slammed the door open, you took it off the hinges and then knocked down the wall that door was hanging on, right? When you look at things like civil rights and women's rights and just all of these things, like you wanted to make the world better in this. We're grateful for that in here. Help us be with you in that. Now, let me talk about Xers for a moment here. When you think about Xers, one of the early titles given the Xer generation was the baby buster generation. And the reason for that was because the birth rate just became like a total bust. It just plummeted. And one of the labels that was given the Xer generation was like aimless. They're aimless. They have no drive. Where's their drive? Well, of course they seem like they didn't have drive, because if you're following the boomers, what generation is going to look like it has drive on the heels of the boomers, right? If you're an Xer, there is one label in particular that you'll probably remember, and it was made famous through a movie called Back to the Future, right, with Marty McFly. Marty McFly had one of his high school teachers named Mr. Strickland, and Mr. Strickland had a label for McFly that in some ways captured this label that wanted to be given to the Xer generation. Anyone remember what it was? He'd say, McFly, you're gonna be have some Xers in the room. Yeah, a slacker. You're just a slacker. Where's your drive? Right? You know, why don't you try and accomplish something in all of this? But here's something important to understand about the Xer generation. And again, this goes back kind of to this birth rate thing that's happening. Part of the reason that the birth rate is dropping is because boomers are busy accomplishing, right? That drive, they are busy changing the world. They start delaying having kids. And that begins creating this fall in the birth rate. And as boomers are delaying having kids, it's not just that that next population is smaller. It's that they are spending an immense amount of time and energy in the world accomplishing all of these things, and they're out there, but you know the place that they were at less? Home. Between a rising divorce rate and all of this stuff that the boomer generation was engaging in, you have a generation of people in our country, and this was one of the other labels given Xers that still stands today, and that is the latchkey generation. Because it was an unprecedented number of kids in this generation that carried a house key in their pocket or around their neck, called latchkey kids, that would go home after school and let themselves in, and they were all on their own. Xers out of this became then one of the most quietly independent generations that our country has ever seen, because it was just out of necessity. And it's not like their parents abandoned them. Boomers didn't abandon their kids. I mean, they showed up at dinner time and they came home, right? It's just, you have a whole generation that spent a lot of time where they had to become self-responsible for getting their homework done, making a snack after school. They had to entertain themselves more than any other generation. It was funny talking with the Xers, like they talked about, like kids today, most of them don't even have a bike. And when they have a bike, they ride it around the cul-de-sac a few times and they're like, whew, I'm done. We would ride our bike for hours because that's the only thing you could do. Well, I mean, we went and played in the desert with rocks and sticks because we had to entertain ourselves, right? And so out of that, it didn't create as much drive as the boomers had, but it sure created a lot of independence, and not like fierce independence to fight and rebel, but a kind of independence that's just like, I'll take care of myself. I'll take care of that. I'll work on that. I'll do that. And so they become this kind of smaller, quieter generation, but very independent. But there is one thing that where they have made a substantial change in all of this, and it came out as they went into adulthood, as they went into parenting. And they were in a boomer world of driving for all of these things. And I think there was something out of those early years of being so independent that they came to value relationships as being super important. And that they decided that as they went into marriage, as they went into careers and church, that they would pull and hold relationships together, and that would be super important in all of this, right? So maybe if there's a moment where you're just like, I'm kind of frustrated with that Xer leader or that Xer employee or that Xer whatever, maybe part of it's because at the end of the day, they were shaped by some things where total success, they can't define total success by just the things that are achieved if it leaves out relationship. Like they will sacrifice many things to find relationship in this. And maybe just understanding that a little, I understand that Xer in my life a little better. And can I say this to Xers, and I being an Xer, like I'm on that older end of Xers, is I'd say this: don't view the world as having to choose between drive and relationship. You can have both. You can have both. And I think Xers, you're a generation that is well equipped to help show other generations how to have both drive and relationship. And boy, isn't that something that the church needs and would benefit from in this. Millennials. Let's talk about millennials for just a moment here. So when you think about millennials, right, this all of a sudden is, again, this huge swing in the birth rate in Western civilization, especially in our country. And part of what's happening here is those boomers that were delaying having kids, they're still having kids into the 80s. And so all of a sudden you have the boomer generation that is having kids, but now into the mid 80s, early 90s, you have Xers that are starting to have kids. And all of a sudden you have two generations that are having kids, and it starts making this much larger generation in this. And one of the labels that gets thrown at millennials oftentimes is this idea of entitlement. Like, you're so entitled. Why? This is such an entitled generation. They're super optimistic, right? But they feel entitled. Like they should just have, the corner office. They should just have success. They should just have the trophy. Life should just be handed to them somehow. And there can be all this frustration with this. But I want you to understand them a little bit better. And again, some of the forces that shaped them. So part of what shaped them was an Xer generation, right, that is now becoming their parents, and these younger boomers. And there is this shift with Xers in parenting in a major way, and even with younger boomers. And that is, they're swinging, from that independence. They want to swing as far away from the opposite of latchkey kids and family as possible. And they go from being the children, latchkey children, to being hovering over present parents, right? And so you have this thing that's happening in them. And on top of that, technology fuels this. When Xers were kids, technology didn't help them at all in this, right? When Xers were little kids, there were no baby monitors. There were no nanny cams. There was nothing to track your kids with, right? There was a phone that was hooked to a wall, right? That's it, right? All right? Xers become parents, and it's not just, nanny cams and baby monitors. It's your kids have smartphones, right? Your kids have built-in trackers now. Like, I remember being a parent, and it was just like, wow, this is so weird. I know where my kids are driving right now, like real time. They don't even know I'm tracking them right now. I mean, they probably did because they're better with technology than me, but that's what I believe. I know right where my kids are right now. And if that's not enough input for me, I can FaceTime them. right? Not just hear what they're saying. I can see the look on their face. I can see what's going on around them. And Xers took full advantage of this. And suddenly millennials are parented by parents, many of whom become known as what? Helicopter parents. Yeah, they hover over them. And again, blessing and curse in this. There's this thing where millennials grew up and the messaging they heard was, man, the world is your oyster. You can be anything you want to be. You've got what it takes. You get to step out in the world. You're amazing. And it's just again and again and again. Parents, more than any other generation, for this generation became advocates for their kids, right? If they went off to school and there was a problem at school, right? Other generations, you remember man, I had to deal with the bully all by myself, right? The teacher, if I wasn't getting along with the teacher would call my parents and I'd get in trouble with my parents. That's switched, friends. Now, something goes on between a student and a parent, the teacher's like, oh, great, now I'm gonna have to deal with them and their parents, right? Because parents, were advocating for their kids, just all of this messaging. It made them one of the most optimistic generations we've ever seen. In fact, in many ways, they are very similar to boomers. They have an optimistic drive about wanting to change the world. They want to get in, they want to change, all of this stuff. But now I want you to think about this. Because as millennials they go from being kids a lifetime, and what have they heard from adults? The world is your oyster. You get to do anything you want. You're going to be awesome. And then they become adults and they go to step into that world to be all they can be. And the adults are all going, who do you think you are? It's they just got whiplash. It's all the adults were saying this, and now I become an adult and they're all saying the opposite, right? So the next time you hear a millennial and you go, are they being a little entitled? Maybe they're just trying to figure out what happened from when they went from childhood to adulthood and the messaging just went whoosh, like this. Put on top of that, the events that they went through, right? The world is your oyster. It's wonderful. You're going to achieve amazing things. You have to make it through 9/11. You have to make it through terrorism, 2 wars on terrorism. Oh, and then there's the '08 housing bubble, right? So when you hear a millennial talking about it and they're a little bit the oyster's starting to stink a little, right? maybe part of the frustration you hear with millennials is a hope and a desire and a drive to say, can we not have a better oyster? And we want to be a part of making a better oyster in the world. See, maybe that's what we're hearing in some of this and what's going on with this. So let me say this to millennials, that we hear you and we understand that there's even an economic thing that you're facing, and this is important for all of us to know in the older generations. The economic situation that they're stepping into is almost the opposite of what the boomers stepped into. When you compare apples to apples to the economic situation of the cost of school, the cost of buying a house, even a car, millennials are forced into something where what was not out of reach in a reasonable way for so many other generations is still out of reach for most millennials. It's going to take a lot longer for them to get to that place. And we need to be patient with that. But to the millennials, can I offer you this encouragement and this kind of pastoral senses? Be patient. Be patient. And be open to being with us. And as a church, we not only want to give you the opportunity to change the world, we recognize that you have already been changing the world and making it a better place. It's not, will you make the world a better place? You have, and we see that. but have patience and keep that courage and that drive that you have. Now, lastly, Generation Z. And again, with Z, what you see is there's a little bit of falling off with the birth rate, but nothing like we saw with the Xer generation or some other past generations. We're still going to see a massive influx of young people in our future with this. And there's so much that we still don't know about Gen Z because they are teenagers and some of them are now young adults in their early 20s. And the label that gets thrown at Gen Z so often is they're so cynical, right? Have a little positivity, right? They're just cynical in this thing, right? But understand this. Like, here's something for us to all understand. Think about everything that the millennials faced, right? That whiplash and all of that stuff. But then add this. Add a pandemic that meant that many of them didn't get to see their high school or college graduations, right? They did that on Zoom. And then remember this, that they had to go through watching all of the adults in the world exercise great maturity through some elections here, right? Right? So think about that for a second. And we're going to be trying to tell them how to do life. And it's like, I hear people saying all this stuff, but it doesn't add up. Like, I think we should recognize that when we see them saying, I'm struggling, there's reasons why. And to understand this, we're not going to have instant credibility in their lives. And maybe the way we find credibility in their lives is not just because, well, I'm older and I know better. Maybe it's credibility that's got to come relationally. Maybe it's credibility that's got to they've got to experience people being with them from older generations in this. And let me say this to Gen Z, your life is a precious gift. And as a church, what we want to be in this next leg of life that you're living is to be a living example that helps you see that about you and helps you live that out in a way that God is designed and made and called you in this. See, friends, there's so much that we can understand between each generation. And so much that we can grow in. And one of the things, though, and I'm going to just state this as a kind of truth, and then there's a video that I want you to watch here. Every generation has so much to offer. Every generation has a gift that is beautiful. And that even came out as Ryan and I were talking to these different groups in different generations. And I want you to just hear some of what they have to say about this.
What do you think are some of the things that, as a generation, that your generation really values a lot?
I think we value community. I think that's a big thing.
They'll stick with you to the end. You can ride this roller coaster ride of life.
As you think about where the world is right now, what do you think millennials bring that the world needs right now?
I think we're super flexible and adaptable. We're moving around more and creating new families of our own out of our friend group and creating stability out of that and our ability to adapt to new things because everything's always changing.
Okay.
I think one of our greatest strengths is that we're supportive and we're inclusive.
What would you all hope that Generation X would be known for?
I was kind of thinking right along what Adam was saying. It's just, I would hope that we're known for seeing people for who they are and loving them.
Anything that when you think about other generations, like you think about your parents, you think about your kids, co-workers in those different generations, what's unique about Xers?
I think we came right in the middle of kind of the boomer generation and the younger generation, which probably helped us balance each other, because now we're getting acclimated to so much technology, as Dan was mentioning, and we're actually training the boomers and the younger kids are training us. So we're kind of like in the middle.
When people look at your generation, what would they say? Or when you look at your generation, what would you say? Like this is where we started, but this is where we are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because of being a post-war generation and our parents having gone through the Depression, World War II, and during the 50s and first part of the 60s, things were pretty rigid. I mean, you believe what you believed, and it was but then all of a sudden, there was a big explosion. Civil rights movement, women's liberation movement, all these different movements. And so it started to make us kind of expand and think more about outside the box at that point and see all these other different things happening. And so I think for this generation, we probably moved more from that rigidity into having more of an open mind about different things because of what all the events that occurred. And so it really changed our minds in a lot of ways.
You know, every generation is a gift, and every generation has a gift. And so let me say this to all of you as followers of Christ, as people that are maybe a part of this church, or even if you're just visiting here this morning, just give away your humility and your gentleness. Give away your patience and give away your love. Keep finding ways to partner in unity and keep finding ways to put Christ on display. I'm going to say a prayer for us. Miles, but as soon as I'm done praying, Miles is going to come and close us out this morning with a few things. But will you just bow your heads in prayer with me right now? Father, I thank you for each and every generation that we have in this church. I thank you for all the generations that we had and the gift that they were before the generations that we talked about. And we ask that you would keep lifting us up together in your Son, Jesus Christ. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.